All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rhythms of Access, the podcast where we explore the intersection of disability, music, and creativity, and featuring candid conversations with disabled artists that are shaping the arts world. This episode is brought to you by Blurring the Boundaries and the Canadian Accessible Musical Instruments Network. That's a mouthful. With support from the Shirk Grant of Canada. Today, I'd like to introduce to you a very close friend of mine, John Kelly. He is a groundbreaking musician, songwriter, and innovator who has redefined what it means to create and perform as a person with a disability in the music industry, from performing at two Paralympic events to creating the bespoke Kellycaster guitar. John's journey is a blend of artistry, advocacy, and resilience. Everybody, welcome John Kelly. John.
Wow, what an introduction. I better go now. Leave, 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 leave while I'm on top.
Yeah, so good to see you, mate.
Thank you.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad that everyone is going to be able to kind of like virtually meet you and get an insight of what the world of John Kelly looks like within the music scene.
Sure, I'll try. I'll try my best.
Awesome. So, John, before we get started, we'd like to play a little game where we do a little icebreaker question for people to kind of get to know you up close and personal.
Ooh, okay.
Um, yeah, so if you could build a dream band with any artists, past or present, who would you pick and what kind of music would you create?
Okay, here we go. Uh, I think I'm going to have a bit of Shane McGowan, who's the sadly passed away last year, the lead singer of the Pogues, because he's a
Mm.
literary genius. He wrote some beautiful words, and he's a London Irishman like myself. So although he's got a
Oh,
really big Irish accent, he was born in London. So we hold that
oh,
together. So I'd have him. I'd have a bit of Martin Luther King. He's not a musician, but we need a bit of wisdom and we need a bit of strength with us.
okay.
I think I'd have. I think I'd have a bit of Christy Moore. Again, another Irish singer-songwriter, but more because of the kind of humour that he brings.
Okay.
Um, I think I'd have a bit of Bjork as well. I think I'd like something a bit left field, a little bit, bring in a bit of technology, bring in a bit of experimental. So we're not
Yeah,
just three chords and me screaming.
yeah.
And probably a
Oh,
bit
that's great.
visionary. Am I allowed a big band?
Absolutely.
It would be a big band. Anyone else that wanted to could join, basically.
Okay.
And the kind of music we'd make would be slightly naughty, slightly
Yeah.
raucous, but very much inclusive in the sense that anyone can join us and
Mm,
sing along or play along.
mm.
There you go.
Wow, that's amazing. This sounds like the superhero band here, like with all the members you would have. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that a lot. So, um, let's talk about your journey. Like, what first sparked your love for music, and how did you realize this was the path that you wanted to follow? These are the path you wanted to take.
Mm. Uh, well, as I alluded to with the creation of my imaginary band, my folks are Irish, um, and music is in culturally in our blood. It's like you can't get away from music. Everyone has that's how our stories have been passed down from generation to generation. A lot of our songs. weren't written down. They were learnt from the elders to the young ones and that kind of way of passing stories along. And I remember that. I
Yeah.
remember as a child, like mum was always singing songs and dad was always singing songs. And when they emigrated over to the UK, I I remember the excitement of, well, two things. I remember the excitement of going to the Irish shop that was in London, one of the local ones, to get Irish food, and also the latest import of record that came over from Ireland that
Oh,
we would
no.
buy. You know, every week would be a new vinyl album that we would buy, and then of course
Yeah.
that would be on the player as soon as we got home. So there was that, and then on a Sunday afternoon, we used to have this thing. This was before Spotify. Showing my age, aren't I? But there was this thing called dial. I don't know if you had it in Canada, but in UK, we had this thing called dial a disc, and
Okay.
you could go to a public phone box, and you put
Yeah.
in a 10 pence piece into the phone box, and you would
Yeah.
dial a disc. It was 16. I remember the number 160, and it
Oh,
would tell you the top three songs that were in the chart, and you could hear
really?
the number one song. And if I was very good, which wasn't often, but when I was good, mum and dad would let me ring dial a disc on a Sunday afternoon. And that was like a treat. That was like I knew I was a good boy that week because I got
It's
to hear.
incredible.
So music was in my life from a very, very early age. And I just kind of
Yeah.
knew when I was at school, I found that that was a way of me connecting my friends back at home. Uh,
Yeah.
and you know, it was all over me. It was all over our house. It was in my blood, and
Mm.
luckily, I found that I was able to do it in some way or other.
Mm. That's incredible. Wow.
Mm.
Wow, that's so cool. Um, I know like you've had so many milestones throughout your career, and if we actually talked about them, we'll be here the whole day. But I know you performed at the Paralympics, and you've done international tours, around the world.
Yeah.
What are the moments that stand out as a defining moment in your journey?
I think I mean, like I just said, I find music is about making connection and bringing people closer together and sharing a moment. And so, I've met a lot of people along the way who've meant a great deal to me, like yourself. We met once or twice and then made the connection, and we sort of stuck together and just being able to keep in touch. Even though I'd love you to be my neighbour and we could have a chat every day, you know,
I love it.
even a long distance, we can keep connected through this thing called music. And I've loved that, and I've been honoured and privileged to meet some really wonderful people along the way. Not just the big gigs, but I've been lucky to do those. But actually, it's just sort of, when I go to a little area and I meet someone and I hear a story or I make a connection in those ways, uh, those are the moments that stick with me. And I keep them going. They keep the flames going. I don't like to go to a place for a one-off, um, or anything like that, even though sometimes our capacity gets a bit stretched trying to keep it all going. But you know what I mean? It's like it's nice to feel like when when you go to a place that there's always a little bit of you that you can reconnect with when you go back. So I've been really lucky to just meet lots of lovely people. I've had lots of moments that I felt very lucky to have had. Obviously, doing stuff like the Paralympic opening ceremony were very scary, but also I learned an awful lot of doing them. I learned how to up the game a bit, how to perform in front of big audiences as well as small audiences. Um, but never lose sight really of how lucky I am to be doing it and always learning. I'm just really, I never feel like I get everything 100% right. And I always go home and I think, right, how can I get that better? What have I learned from today? And, what do I need to practice next time. I rehearse and work hard for any gig. I treat, doesn't matter what size it is, it's
Mm.
putting the work in so that you can then enjoy it, you know?
That's humility right there. That's very humbling. Um, just to like give in your best, regardless of like the scale of the gig. I
Yeah,
think sometimes people tend to forget that, right?
yeah,
Along the way, like, oh, this is not as prestigious, so
yeah,
I'm not gonna.
yeah. I do
Like,
panic a lot. I get really nervous. I get really nervous for any sort of gig, whether it's to 5 people or 500 people. And
yeah,
I remember the Paralympics, I was really particularly worried about. I like floor monitors, like wedges. I
oh my
don't like
gosh,
in-ear monitors. And one of the reasons is
right,
because my ears sweat and
okay,
I can't reach my
so
ears.
they come off,
But yeah,
yeah,
so like when we did the Paralympics, obviously it was live, it was televised. They
yeah,
reckon 4 billion people worldwide watched it, 3.8 million or
jeez,
something like that. So that's a huge audience.
jeez.
And if my in-ear monitors popped out during those moments, I wasn't going to hear the band or anything, and I was petrified. That
So was that part of your request to ask for floor monitors instead?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're doing like stuff that's with television or live, or I've only done that, a handful of times, but you have to do in-ear monitor, in-ear wedges.
Right.
Oh my God, I really, really, really panicked. So yeah, my access requirements are always like I learned. I was lucky. I got a break about 20 years ago when I became. I've always had music in my life, but it wasn't
Yeah,
till like maybe the last 15 years that I feel like I can say I'm a professional musician because I'm doing it all the time.
yeah,
Uh, but that's when I really learned how important, like my access rider, my access needs are all part of me bringing my best to any performance. And like, the in-ear monitors are just like one example of like some of the thinking I've had to do. I
yeah.
always like to say that access is creativity in action. And so uh, that kind of, you know, methodology of us being practitioners, creative practitioners, means that access is kind of also in my blood. It's like, how how do I make sure that access is there and upfront and I don't have to hide it?
Yeah,
It's very much part and parcel of what makes me the performer that I am.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna quote you in one of my social media platforms. We're also gonna quote you in this podcast as we spread the news about this episode. Access is creativity in action. I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
How much of the royalties am I going to get for that?
We'll talk. We'll talk off camera. We'll
All right.
talk off the
I,
mic.
I've met, I've met, I've met you in the car park before, and it was a scary deal.
It's so funny. So yeah, I know the Kellycaster guitar has become central to your music and identity as a performer.
Yeah.
Do you mind like talking to us about its creation and
Mm.
how it's also transformed you as an artist like you, and how it's even transformed your artistry
Yeah.
in general?
Um, I've always so like access to me is like, how do I get around something? How do I get over something? How do I break it and make it my own so it works and does what I want it to do? That's what access is about. That's why it's creativity, because you're looking at something and trying to do it in a different way. So I've always used technology and in one way or another to write songs, or back in the day when it was like single finger chords on a keyboard or a sequencer or whatever. Um, but I've always wanted to play live, and I'm a punk, so I suppose I lean towards guitar orientated music, and like I knew like there was like guitar simulators, and there was some stuff on in the early days around iPads and GarageBand and stuff like
Yeah,
that, and they all did little bits of it, but never to the extent that I, as a professional musician, could like write and it be aesthetically part of my performance. It was just too clumsy, or there wasn't enough control over it to make it a professional instrument, or the sound wasn't good or whatever. And I was doing some work with a brilliant organization that I work with in the UK called Drake Music. And we were developing this thing called Hackmeets, which was this idea of breaking instruments and trying to get them to be more accessible. And right in the early days, so I'm talking maybe 12 years ago, we were looking for like some projects to get going with. And I said, look, as a kid, I've always played the snooker cue and the tennis racket. They've been my guitar. But I know that if I was to sellotape the iPad onto the tennis racket, but had a little bit better sounds and more control, I could play the guitar. So I came up with this idea, and I said I really wanted it to be a real stringed instrument. I wanted to be able to treat the strings like you do when you tune it, be able to do different tunings, create shapes. But obviously, my left hand needed to have a different kind of way of controlling. But I wanted to be able to strum so that I wasn't locked into a BPM, a beats per minute thing. I could play with other musicians. To an extent, I could improvise, and I could play a little bit of chord, a bit of rhythm, and maybe a little bit of melody, a little riff here and there. And
so like finger pickering, yeah.
Yeah. So and some brilliant people in that room. There was only like 4 or 5 of us, and the brilliant Charles Matthews, who
Yeah.
said I'd be up for doing some of that. I think we could get some data from the string and then try and get it into a pickup, and then get some signal, and then do some work with that. There was this thing called the Bella platform, which was a UK thing, which was an audio interface that was really fast at reading data. And we married it together with a little Max for Live patch, put that into Ableton. And very quickly, actually, the early days of the Kellycaster came about. And suddenly I was able to play 3 chords. We then was able to bank them up till you played 10 chords. And then we just kept working at all the nuances of what I needed for it to be a robust touring instrument. And 10 years, this year is 10 years since the original, we launched the Kellycaster. So it's actually pretty old now, to be honest, in terms of technology. But it's still going, and it's still amazing, and it's still groundbreaking in that there isn't many instruments that can do similar things. I've still got a long way to go with it. There's lots we want to do with it, and I definitely need to get it out there. I want more people to get their hands on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely,
I hope
absolutely.
that gives you a little history, but the Kellycaster was my idea, but I was lucky that I was surrounded with amazing, beautiful people who had knowledge and talent, and together, we talk about collaboration, and that was for me one of the key times when I realized the power of collaboration and connection. As different artists working together, it was amazing.
So speaking of collaboration, what makes collaboration so vital to your process?
I think it's like when you find that you've got a common language together, and I don't mean verbal, I mean just a vibe. It's more about your values and beliefs. I think it's about how you feel about stuff and what's important to you, and making those kinds of connections. And I found that in that room with the people, with Charles and with Gowan and Zen, who was from that time. There was a guy called Dave Darch, who was a guitar player, and I remember him going, "Oh yeah, you could do this upside down, or you could do this that way round, or this is." and he taught me about chords because I was learning how to play guitar a completely different way to a traditional guitar player. And in doing it, I was learning new things that he, as a guitar player, goes, "Oh wow, I could try that," you know. So I think
Right.
inspiration is when there's a mutual sharing of the journey, uh, and actually you all realize that each of you have elements of strength and power, and it's not about anyone holding that power, but it's about how you use, you know, on stage. I feel privileged that I'm able to use my voice and sing to an audience, and I'm grateful that audiences listen to my songs and then they say, you know, it touched their hearts or it meant something to them. That's what means something to me, and that's what I mean about using our power. You know, disabled people have been discriminated against and oppressed for too long, and the power shift needs to change. And I think music's a great tool for doing that. And collaboration is the way in which we can show that inclusion, that genuine engagement and diversity happens when we recognize the power that we all have, and that we can share that we're all part of the band. We've all got something to bring, and sometimes it's about you taking the lead, or it's about me taking the lead.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the whole band that gets the bow at the end of the night. It's the whole band that gets the credit, um, and that's what collaboration is for me. It's about that mutual sharing, that mutual connection,
Yeah.
um, and going through the muddy bits, if that makes sense. Going through the hard
Yeah.
stuff. You know, we don't have all the answers, so it's like, will you hold my hand and go with me on this, because I don't know what I'm doing. And you know, that's what happened with the Kellycaster, and that's what's happening now as I develop new bits. And I don't know
Yeah.
where it's going to take me. The future's exciting. I've got lots of
Yeah.
ideas, lots of new songs, and yeah, a lot to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know if that
Um,
says something about collaboration or not. I don't know.
no, no, you did. You did. You did. I know that with access, there's a lot to do with like, creativity and adapting and being flexible to different things like improvising access essentially.
Mm,
Um, and I know that during the pandemic, there was a lot of that for you to bring music to people
mm.
in ways that you hadn't done before. How were you, like, what was the light bulb moment where you were able to adapt your performances during the pandemic?
Um, we lived in a time that was where we didn't know what was going to happen next, and it was scary, and there was a lot of scary things going on, and we never want to see it happen again if we can help it. But I think what the world learned a little bit was things could be done in a different way. Um, and actually, we're forgetting that. We're forgetting those important lessons. And I think, you know, if I'm really honest, it's still with me. The kind of, you know, what we learn about living in a world where we're not too sure what's around the corner or what might happen. That's kind of a world that, as a disabled person, I live every day. You know, I always go to environments. I'm not too sure if it's going to be accessible. I'm not too sure if I'm going to be able to manage fully in an environment. So, in a way, although that time was horrendous and it hit disabled people's lives harder in many ways, we lost some really important friends during that time. It did sort of demonstrate our resilience as disabled people to adapt and modify and find ways around things. And I think in some ways, non-disabled people learned a lot from us in those times, because we were saying, well, we could do this online, we could do that online. And I kind of learned really badly about how to plug in my interface and get a guitar in there and get more mics and how to get the sound out onto the screen. And suddenly I had new audiences that I'd never really engaged with before online. And it became important to me because it was the only way of making connections. And so we did this thing called Bunk Off Early Fridays, which Bunk Off Friday in England is like, when well, I don't know if you were naughty enough, but if you finish work a little bit early to go and party,
Yeah.
or you leave school a bit earlier. I'm not advocating that at all. Don't do it. But
Kids don't listen to this.
during COVID times, we did this thing called Bunk Off Early Friday, where we did
Yeah.
a thing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or 3:30 it was, where we just streamed like a gig, and we didn't know who was going to be there. We didn't know how it was going to work, and I just slowly evolved how you chat to people online, and how you use Zoom, and how you use streaming
Yeah.
software, and it was just an amazing thing, and it became really important. And now we talk about this hybrid world, and in some ways it frustrates me that the powers that be, many of our governments and agencies, are going, we want everybody to get back in the office. And actually, I worked really hard during COVID times because I wasn't having to deal with an inaccessible transport system. I was working from home and I could do a hell of a lot more because it was kind of on my terms. The access
Yeah.
was in my own. So I learned an awful lot about it. And I think, as well as access being a creative tool, the importance of access is that it's a human right, I believe. We need access to education, we need access to health, and we need access to participation. It's part of our human right to belong to, whether it's the music industry or whatever your sector is. So, even though I say, access is a tool of creativity, access is also a human right, and it's also something that we have to fight for, and remind people that they have a responsibility to make sure it's in place so that we can be part of the picture, that we can be part of the tapestry that is the music industry. Because we're in there, we're there. You make brilliant music, Gift, and you're not like separate from the music industry. You're not trying to get in there. You are there, and it's just whether or not the music industry realizes that actually it's more diverse than it thinks it is, and it needs our voices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good advice. While we're still talking about like what is needed, do you have any advice that you'd give to aspiring artists with disabilities who want to break into the music industry?
Well, I'm not. I don't. I'm not really good at giving advice, really. Every situation is different, and everyone's
Yeah.
context is really different. Uh, if the stuff I've learned is to reach out and listen to other people, really listen, uh, and you know, there is lots of great people out there that have been before and have got solutions. There are a lot of people go, I'm the first one to do this, and I never really feel that way. I think there's some great people who I've learned from who've done it before me, and I've learned from them and then added a bit of my own spice or juice or whatever you want to call it, my own bit of flavor.
Yeah.
So I think listening to others is really important, but I also think listening to yourself, listen to your own believe in yourself, and go with your intuition, go with your heart, and don't necessarily follow the rules that you're told to follow. Be brave enough to say, I need for this to work for me, I need to change the rules, or I need to break something to make it work for me. And as long as you're not harming anyone else and you're not damaging anyone else and you're not doing it to discriminate or oppress anybody else, then we need to, creativity is about doing things in different ways. And if we don't do things in different ways, nothing changes. So just that braveness, courage, or whatever you want to call it, to try and do things in a different way, is really important, because that's what creativity is. It's about
So in
tearing
a nutshell,
tearing up the rule book and making it your own, and you know, yeah,
hmm.
yeah,
So in a nutshell, tearing up the rule book and creating your own, and be patient and listen, and also listen to your own intuition to set up your own path. I
yeah,
love that a lot.
yeah. And getting the advice from I think that a lot of people do like to go down a lone path and do it on their own. But I think
Yeah,
because I value collaboration, I value learning from other people. It makes me stronger. It makes me richer. It makes my songs better when I work with other people, even though it's harder. I think um,
yeah,
it's more. It brings a value that enriches your life. I think so. Don't feel like you're on your own. Find people to support you and listen to them. I think get because then you're not on your own, and united we're stronger, aren't we? United, we can take the world on a bit
yeah,
more because we're not alone. We're not the sole voice. You know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, John, like every time I feel like I need to grab a notebook and have like a book full of your nugget quotes that are so filled with
John,
wisdom.
a book of John's twaddle.
Exactly. So, John, we have to get going, but before we head out, are there
Yeah.
any exciting things ahead of 2025 for you?
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh
please
yeah.
give us, you tell us a little bit about that very quickly.
Just finished today a new mix of a new song that will be out and about in a couple months' time. So lots of new material floating about that I'm starting to gig. Actually, next week's my first gig is it first gig of the year? Maybe second. So I've got
Yeah,
gigs coming up. We're playing the Manchester Folk Festival in the UK. I'm hoping to do a bit more travelling this year and playing across the pond maybe in a few months' time. Um, Going back home to Ireland to play a few gigs there, I hope. So there's some new material, some new places to play, some new connections to be made. Um, I've just got some Arts Council funding to do some new learning. And then exciting
yeah,
thing linked with my friends over in Canada is that I'm working with you guys, and I'm developing uh, the evolution of the Kellycaster, Mark II.
mhm,
We're at
yeah,
1.3 at the moment. We might
yeah,
have a 1.5 in the next couple of months, but hopefully
yeah,
in this coming year we'll have a
2.0.
Kellycaster 2.0, hopefully.
I love that. This
So
is a
there's loads
really
going
exciting
on.
year.
Yeah, loads going on.
Wow,
I'm really excited. And can you believe it's already February? So
that's wild to me.
I'm already getting my winter woolies out for next Christmas.
That's wild to me. And people can follow you
Oh
on
yeah,
social media. Is it John Kelly Music?
yeah. Obviously, I'm encouraging people at the moment to go onto my mailing list, which you can get onto via my website. Just because I'm tending to, I am still on social media a lot, but as we all know, it's a bit of a toxic world on
Yeah,
social media, and I can know, I think we've learned over the last few months not to tolerate the intolerant, and there's
yeah,
a lot of bad stuff going on at the moment that
absolutely.
we can't tolerate. So I'm still around on social media, but I might not be posting
Okay,
so much on some of the more toxic
okay.
platforms that
And your website is for people to make note.
yeah, www.johnkellymusician.co.uk. But I am on all the socials. You'll find me on
Okay,
Instagram and Facebook and all those kind of stuff. But I would recommend signing up to my mailing list just so that should anyone decide they're going to shut down their platform,
yeah,
you've still got a way
absolutely.
of contact. I'm on YouTube and bits and pieces. So
Absolutely. So, folks, check out John Kelly's website so you can join his mailing list, johnkellymusician.co.uk.
yeah, the album, sorry, the album's on Spotify and
album on
on
Spotify.
Tidal and all those sort of online platforms. Better late than never is the name of the album.
Excellent. We're going to include all that info in
Sure.
the description of this podcast for everyone to follow. John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Key takeaways for me personally is innovation, resilience, the power of collaboration, and creating your own rule book. I love that a lot. Those are my key takeaways. We'll be curious to hear what other people's takeaways were from this episode.
Yeah.
But again, please check out John Kelly on his website, johnkellymusician.co.uk, and keep an eye out for more episodes of Rhythms of Access to hear more stories of disabled artists that are reshaping the world of music. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.